Welcome to the webinar, Is Google Evolving Towards a Focus on Visual Search? My name is Garrett Sussman. I'm the head of content at GatherUp. This is a co-sponsored webinar with our sister company, GatherUp, and we are joined today by Mike Blumenthal of GatherUp. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
And we are joined by David Mihm of ThriveHive. David, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, great to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So you guys are two of the go-tos when it comes to local search. Today we're going to talk about a lot of the interesting things that are happening with images, imagery, and just visuals in general on Google when you're searching and you're seeing various entities that appear. What's changing? What do business owners need to be aware of? How does it impact local search? So just starting from the get-go, David, I'll start with you. When we talk about visual search, what does that entail? What do you think about when we're talking about visual search on Google?
Well, I just think that to me anyway, that it means that instead of the traditional sort of text-based primary set of results, that images are the dominant mode of sort of consuming the possible answers from Google. So I know that there's all kinds of other associated possibilities with things like augmented reality and stuff like that. But for me, at the basic level, it's essentially replacing or at least subsuming text results in favor of images. And I know that the whole point of this webinar is talking about its impact on local. So the specific examples that we've seen, for example, are image carousels as opposed to pack results, or at the very least, images helping to augment the basic sort of name, address, phone review data that shows up in a traditional 3-pack.
Yeah, it's really interesting what's appearing and the different types of entities, which kind of leads to like the next part of this, Mike, which is we're seeing Google really move to this whole kind of development of entities. What are entities for the attendees, and what role do images play in kind of the development of entities?
So entity search is the Google knowledge graph, right? It's people, places, things. It's layers of real world objects that Google creates relationships between and accumulates information about. They've been Google Local was in many ways the test bed for developing sort of entity logic, and it has been expanded to politicians and movie actors and movies. But in local, it's about the places, the businesses, the people own them, and the things they sell. Essentially, the high-level view of entities. And I would point out, as you can see on this desktop screen, that products play a big role in that because it's a very visual environment. And I think as you go into the next screen, you'll see mobile is even much more visible than the desktop, right? And in this, in mobile, I think one of the things that people haven't discussed a lot in our industry is the fact that Google Maps is becoming a visual discovery environment, that we all tend to focus on the desktop, but a lot of this visual content is occurring in Google Maps. And a lot of people are using Google Maps for this discovery.
Right, and I think, yeah, it's not just that we tend to focus on the desktop, but we tend to focus on Google search. And I think that the direct use of the Maps app on our phones is something that Google's basically, if they've ever revealed data about it, they last revealed data years ago. And I think it's sort of a totally hidden part of the iceberg of local search in terms of where impressions and interactions are coming from.
And another part of this is kind of where we as users have control. You're mentioning, Mike, you're talking about the knowledge graph and just this idea of, what of this information are the business owners providing? What are just everyday users providing? And like, how is that changing?
Well, Google is like a vacuum cleaner, and they'll take data wherever they can get it. So there's thousands of edits every day, and additions to Google Maps every day, tens of thousands, millions every day. So certainly images come from the business owner, they come from users, they come from scraping the website. Google will take it wherever they can get it. I think Google has done a really good job with their local guides in terms of encouraging people to add content. They've also, though, upped their game in terms of communicating with business owners so that business owners are now adding more content than I think any time in the past. So a business owner needs to take control, otherwise their business listing at Google becomes the playground for consumers, which I think is a formula for disaster.
David, are your clients becoming like the business owners that you work with? Do they have a better understanding of Google My Business and their kind of opportunities / responsibilities with kind of updating their own information?
Yes and no. I think that Google My Business has certainly become so much more obvious in, everyone's searching experience that business owners know, kind of they have some vague sense of, hey, there's this sort of knowledge panel business profile for me that is likely to show up when people search for me. I still am not sure that there's what would I say? I'm not sure that people still seem to be stuck in the mindset of it's a, sort of traditional business listing. There's basic info I can fill out. It's kind of a set it and forget it, kind of mentality. And I think that the broad range of new features that Mike's really done a better job than anyone at documenting and kind of keeping up with over the last few years, that there's still not a lot of adoption of things like posts and videos and all of the more sort of visual elements that are, I think Google intends to be more sort of timely and time sensitive. I'm still not sure that there's a broad understanding of just how much stuff there is that you can update on or should update on an ongoing basis.
Right, and to some extent, certainly there's a huge lag time between when a business thinks that they should be updating their Facebook page, which was true in 2012 and 2013 in terms of organic reach of Facebook and images, versus today where Google has, in those 6-8 years has totally dominated local search to the point where Yelp and TripAdvisor and Facebook have become much less of a resource for consumers. And there is a lag for sure in terms of users catching up with that. But I think, people are still doing citations the way they were doing them 10 years ago. So I think it'll take time for that to happen. But I think there's a movement in this direction anyways, beginning to see other professionals understanding it and pushing it forward. So I agree with David. It's hard to, in terms of small business, it's hard to get them to do anything. So.
Right. Exactly. So when we're looking at the pictures here, like for the Barbara Oliver jewelry, where are these pictures actually coming from? Do you think they were uploaded by them or by users? Do you know?
Oh, yeah, I do know. So early on with Barbara, I picked, she became a client of mine in 2009. She's hidden in a 3rd-story office building and had no street level presence. And my sister bought some jewelry there and connected us. And I have Barbara. One of the things we encouraged her to do was to initially hire professional photographers. She was too cheap. She ultimately became a reasonably good photographer herself and has done a great job of Google posts and photography around her many sort of products and things she sells. So she, starting probably 5 years ago, started developing significant skills in publishing eye candy to Google.
Gotcha. So that's really interesting that she's like kind of serving that up and definitely benefiting from it when you see like looking up engagement rings Buffalo and seeing these images come up. One thing that we wanted to talk about, which you were really interested in, Mike, was just how Google is starting to become better at understanding the imagery, the photos that are being uploaded. And I think, Barbara is a perfect example. What are you seeing in terms of kind of the sophistication when it comes to the different images?
Google has developed an incredible ability to look at an image, parse the elements of the image, and then understand the things that are in the image, the entities that actually occupy the image. So when Barbara uploads an image of an engagement ring and you search on engagement rings, Google pulls up her images of engagement rings in the search results. The same when you search on earrings. She uploads images of earrings, Google knows that they're earrings and shows results for images of earrings in the search results. And Google is doing this across the local pack, across the thumbnail images that occur on mobile, and in this new search by photos, and in Google Maps. Virtually everywhere where somebody's likely to do a product or search, Google is attempting to surface images relevant to the query, directly relevant to query by analyzing the image. So they've come a huge way. They're incredibly sophisticated and understand what's in these images. I mean, I'm blown away by it.
That's really cool. And specifically with products, I mean, how much is it on the business owner to, kind of get their inventory up on Google at this point? Like, should they be putting their like all of their retail products up there? Is it just an image thing?
Well, products, as David pointed out, I think it's an article he wrote in the past, is probably potentially done with some sort of standardized image. I think, a MacBook Pro is a MacBook Pro, and I don't know that there's any need for unique images in that context, but I do think that businesses need to be publishing those. In fact, Google just bought a company that was doing just that, helping businesses literally post their images, their product images to Google and to the web just by selling them, right? It's hard for small businesses to often have a sophisticated enough inventory that they can put their images of everything up there. Barbara's fortunate, she's in custom jewelry, so she takes these photographs for the customers, for social purposes, and re-leverages them for Google as well. But I think in the case of products, I think ideally every product should be up there, yes. Well, David, what was the name of that product that Google bought that was doing the scanning at the point of sale?
I'm not sure if you're referring to Pointy.
I am referring to Pointy, yes, that's the one.
So Pointy does, right, so Pointy was more around a product feed, though, that, at least as far as I understand it, than product images, just knowing what items a business sold and for how much.
Well, it though then attached the product feed of that content with industry standard images for that item, and then fed them to Google into the knowledge graph. So they were automating not just the existence of the fact that a small business had it, they were automating the image for that as well.
Yep. But I mean, to me, the big takeaway here is just that Google is, I think, more interested than they've ever been in identifying at a very granular level images for each thing that a business sells, and they're also doing a better job of surfacing that sort of deeper information. I think, 4 or 5 years ago, most of us would have said, okay, make sure you've got a great cover photo and a great, logo or profile or whatever, and maybe a couple photos of your staff, and you're probably good. I think that we're seeing just with, the screenshots we're looking at right here, that's no longer good enough. I think you need a really high quality image of every sort of major product or service that you're offering, because you never know, what type of interface Google's going to show for the keywords that you're trying to rank for at a minimum.
I think that's a great point. And obviously it goes beyond products and retail. I mean, with local, naturally that's important. But when we start to talk about like the hospitality industry, for instance, we're starting to see the same sort of thing. In this example for local search we're looking at was kind of this, the difference between just looking for like a hotel in the area versus a hotel with a swimming pool. And to your point, Mike, like it can identify pictures that have the actual swimming pool image in the results.
Right. No, it's amazing. It's magic.
So we were talking
not so much magic,
about
Mike, right?
Well, it's just magic in the sense of it being incredible development of technology,
right,
that I didn't anticipate 5 years ago. It's magic in that sense, David. Just in the sense that I love living in the era we live in.
And you were talking about restaurants the other day and what we're starting to see, like with what they're doing with meals or menus.
So Google, if you do a menu search in Google Maps, or if you do a restaurant search in Google Maps, and a user has uploaded a picture of a menu, Google highlights that with special annotation and shows that picture of the menu. They know it's a menu, and they then present it as a call to action on the listing in Google Maps. And then in Google Maps also, when consumers upload food items, or the business uploads food items, Google they are able to identify a lot of it, but they're using that interface in Google Maps to continue to train their machine learning, and they're asking consumers what these items are, and consumers are then annotating them and adding them, and Google is accumulating that knowledge so that they're better able to get even more granular in their understanding of an important visual area, which is food.
Absolutely, and I think it's really interesting, you know, that impacts the consumer. When we're talking about, like, are they, so one thing we haven't really talked about yet is how Google works with some of the other, like, you know, websites out there that are doing similar things like Yelp, Facebook, TripAdvisor. What do those relationships look like? Are they pulling in from all these different sites, or are there limitations that you guys have seen?
In
I mean,
terms of,
I haven't seen any photos from Yelp directly pulled into a GMD profile, for example. But I think that Google is clearly able to look at that information, and that they may be, you know, they may be sort of cross-referencing semantic relevance of keywords they're finding, you know, in the captions of those photos and that sort of thing to help build their AI. I think that you know, what it feels like to me is that they had started with some sort of critical mass of understanding of you know, image types in a given category, and they're now using users to, you know, let's say they got them 90% of the way there, and they're now asking the, you know, massive number of billions of users of Google Maps to sort of help them fill in the last 10%. It's kind of what it feels like to me.
historically, in the hotels anyways, Google has scraped some of the online travel agencies' images and brought them
right
into
from Oyster and those kinds of sites. I do remember that. Yep.
And certainly in terms of other content, like review content, particularly in hotels, they're actually now showing TripAdvisor reviews right in the knowledge graph. So depending on the site, I mean, Yelp and Google have a somewhat contentious relationship. So Google is, even though they're, as David said, they're probably scraping everything at Yelp, they're not showing it just because they want to avoid the embarrassment of it, but anyplace else they are. Now Facebook is interesting because Facebook lets them see some things, but not everything. And I think Google really likes sites that let them see everything. And apparently TripAdvisor has sort of, to use an old business metaphor, opened the kimono.
Yeah, they had that interesting move recently, TripAdvisor, where they created a tool to monitor reviews, which is interesting because they're, you know, a review site themselves, but like they're monitoring third-party reviews. So it's interesting how these rules change among the different sites. And we know, like, to your point with Facebook, Google does pull those in to the, you know, reviews of the knowledge graph as well, right? For a Google My Business listing, like you'll see Facebook reviews at the bottom sometimes, or did they pull that?
Yep. And the way these images do show up, though, as you look at the organic, they'll show up as thumbnails. So it's important that if a site is ranking well for a business or for a search, it's important that the images about you on those sites look good, because they're going to show up as the thumbnail on the organic site of search. So even if Google isn't using them semantically, I mean, it's hard to think about images in a semantic sense, but that's what we're talking about. I mean, thinking about what is the image, what is the thing in the image, what is the relationship of that thing to your business? That's semantic image thinking. But in these thumbnails, Google's going to show those images from these third-party sites. So it's important that you control that view of your business every place you can with as high a quality imagery as you can, because these images contribute to the perception of your brand at Google.
Speaking of the perception of the brand and the images you control, like I've seen a lot of restaurants upload stock photography, and that's
Gag
obviously
me with a spoon.
Exactly. Like you want to be authentic. What does Google do? What's the consequence of like a business owner uploading like a stock photo? Because obviously Google can tell, right?
Yeah, when you look at their computer vision AI testing tool platform, they know that an image is used 2,000 other places, 5,000 other places. And in fact, in the map user guidelines for images, they expressly prohibit the use of stock photography by users. But in terms of businesses, so far, we haven't seen a negative effect of it. But the question I would ask of any business is why? I mean, it's so easy to get good photographs. It's so inexpensive to hire a great photographer. Why would you want to use stock photography and look like every other generic stock, every other business that uses stock photography? To me, when I look at images that are stock, particularly in the service area, my first thought is they're spam.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and our mutual friend Aaron Wyke has been, since his very first local U presentation, has always joked about, oh, you run a bank, your website has to have a photo of a handshake on the front page, right? It's like it's a caricature in a lot of cases when you use stock photography. And yeah, Mike, to your point, I mean, I'm not sure how familiar our attendees are with my local marketing stack concept that I put on Tidings a few years ago. But I mean, for me, there's a reason that photography and videography is like the number 3 or 4 thing you should focus on as you're starting a business. I think it's just one of the foundational elements of your brand that, if you're using a stock photo, you're sort of shooting yourself in at least one kneecap as a local business to consumers who actually want a personal, experience that they know is in their community, not a very obvious stock photo that is more typical from a big box type brand.
So that speaks to certainly the conversion. We're seeing a lot of people convert right at Google to call the business or get driving directions. And what David just described speaks to that conversion optimization. But now that we have clear and present evidence that Google understands the entities in the image, we think it's now gone beyond that you have to think about the image, not just for conversion, but also to edify Google and what they understand about your business. So you have to think about the image on multiple levels now and aggressively move forward with them. I mean, the day was yesterday when you should have hired the photographer. You can get them in for 4 hours for $500 and they'll shoot, 500 images or 300 images of your business that you can use throughout the next 6 months.
Speaking of photographers, what's your guys' experience with the Google Trusted Photographer program? Would you recommend that to people, or how do you recommend they find a photographer that would produce quality if they don't have resources they know of?
Well, I mean, the Google Trusted Photographer program, they keep changing names on it and standards. Within that, there are good ones and there are bad ones. Right. Some of them, insist on saying that their work is going to change your rank at Google, which is just not true. But the ones that are honest and good, they produce great photographs and they do a really nice job, and they can help you get your street view imagery squared away. If Google has gotten lazy and hasn't driven by your business recently, they can help get that squared away even at the street view level now. So there are times when it becomes critical, because if you're like, there was once a period when David building was under construction and his street view showed that, and I captured that image and uploaded it to his GMB listing just as a sort of geo joke, right? But it's important that it looked good across the board. And if you've got an old street view image, it could confuse people. And so I think there are times when you absolutely need a street view photographer. And I think also in visual businesses, businesses where cleanliness is a critical consumer criteria, like, for example, tattoo parlor, I think having a picture of the interior in a virtual way would be a critical conversion point. So my answer is, if it works, if it's right for you, it makes a lot of sense.
Do you recommend that across the board? So like for like healthcare industry or lawyers, doctors, lawyers, like is the interior and the staff the best options for any sort of photos and visuals, or do you have any other recommendations for like those industries? Obviously, home services, you can do the actual jobs that are done, but what about like legal and healthcare?
staff, I think, is important. You know, in any professional service industry, I think people want to know, you know, even a home service, right? Who's going to show up at my front door and be mowing my lawn, just from a sort of safety and expectation standpoint. But I think, yeah, in industries like legal, where you know, most cases are confidential, you can't really take photos of clients. You know, your office may be in a nondescript, you know, office park somewhere that might not be the most impressive thing. Your staff really are, you know, is the way that you can sort of, I think, personalize your profile. And, you know, frankly, you should be probably reusing those staff photos and telling their stories on your website as well. So I think that's kind of a no-brainer for most professional services.
An interesting side note there is that when Google was doing author photos back in the day, I once did a consumer survey where I took 4 real author photos from lawyers and asked consumers which one they trusted most as a lawyer. And it was fascinating because they trusted the old, staid white guy the most, you know, compared to the younger lawyers or the ones that were smiling. So clearly consumers have a preference. That was 10-year-old research. I don't know if it's still the same, but I agree with David. I think if you're in a people business, you need to be thinking about people. One of the things about lawyers and some of these businesses is it's very difficult to do a semantic type of image. But for example, in the law case, Carrie Hill from Local Use suggested, why not shoot a lawyer in the courtroom? We took a couple of those images, we loaded them up to the Google Image AI testing platform, and it knew that the lawyer was in the platform, or it was in the courtroom. So it is possible, if you sort of just stretch your imagination a little bit about context, to find an image that shows that person in the right place. It's not always possible, and it's not always easy, but it is, you know, potentially possible.
Yeah. Can we advance the slides, a couple of slides, and show the attendees kind of this tool that Mike's talking about?
Oh yeah. So yeah, and I was excited to talk about this, but this has been coming up a lot lately, where Google is actually, you know, kind of removing images. And so, Mike, you were excited to talk about this in terms of, you know, the way Google understands images. So you want to talk about this tool?
Sure. So Google has an API for image analysis, and they offer this tool up here and in the API docs as a way to understand what the API does. And you can upload any image to it. And from a local SEO point of view, to David's point about images being, you know, critical for Google to understand a business, it's a great way to test your images, because in this they tell you what objects Google recognized in the image. But also what we're seeing is that Google is starting to reject some images because they're inappropriate in a nanny bot sort of way. And this particular image was sent to me by a local SEO, and the image was rejected. It's an image of a physical therapist working with a person's leg, and it was rejected as too racy by Google. You can see that it's adult and racy in this particular view right there. So this tool is useful, I think, broadly, so that you can understand Google's semantic understanding of the image. You can also see where this image is being used across the web. So if it's a stock image, you can see how many other businesses just like yours are using it. And if it's considered under their safe search, inappropriate for some context, because if an image gets rejected when you upload it to Google Post, this tool will let you understand why. Now, interestingly, this image in color was rejected, but when they converted it to black and white, while it was still considered slightly racy, the adult themes were minimized and it passed muster.
It's very interesting. I have another example here, because the other one that we were hearing in the industry was yoga pictures, and same sort of idea. Nothing actually wrong with a yoga picture, but the assumption is the fact that they showed skin was what triggered the racy and got it rejected.
Yep. We at ThriveHive, we work with both the Yoga Alliance and Association of Bodywork and Massage Professionals, and so you can imagine both categories. We've had quite a few sort of customers and also our marketing guides who are helping our customers kind of report that in the last couple of months, especially, that the posts are getting rejected, and it's very clear that whether GMB is using this exact tool or something comparable, it's pretty easy to understand why it's happening. And we haven't necessarily found a great way around it, other than we'll have to try Mike's tip of making all these images black and white and see if that helps.
Well, the other interesting thing you mentioned earlier was how, also how Google, we're talking about advertising and how, an image for Google Post might be different than an image on Google Maps. Now, Mike, can you talk a little bit about how those kind of standards are different from Google's perspective, and where like an image like this would be okay versus not be okay?
Right. Yeah, I don't fully understand it, but I'll give it my best shot. So Google Maps is like a directory, a business directory. And so with user generated content, which under, section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, Google is fully protected from any use of Google Maps by a consumer. And as such, they're not as worried about it. So if a consumer uploads an image, Google can't be sued, the business can't be, Google can't be sued for it. So they're not concerned about it. And since it's a directory, it does not fall under advertising rules. Advertising rules, on the other hand, are more restrictive. And since Google provides the advertising, they are held to a higher standard of truth in advertising, and not to be selling things that are illegal to sell. For example, alcohol to minors, or those types of things. So they're held to a different standard. And while escorts may be legal in Las Vegas, they're not legal in most countries or cities. And so Google restricts advertising around that topic, and they restrict images around it. Post is considered an advertising environment because it's controlled by the business. It's not an open platform like a directory. So that's my best understanding of it. Hopefully that's clearer than when we started.
Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting because I know we're trying out, we were talking about whether, showing a pipe versus a hookah versus like a gun range versus a casino versus alcohol in context. It's interesting to see what ultimately is allowed versus what it can identify as, inappropriate and is taken down. I remember a few months ago, you guys remember the story with the schools, where like a bunch of schools had images that were being posted, I believe, on maps that were inappropriate. I wonder when this sort of like nanny bot or understanding of images would apply to something like that.
Yeah, schools have been a problem right along, right? It's the great prank to punk your school on Google, I think. I mean, reviews and other stuff. I don't know when Google has implemented this. I do know that I tried to, a couple months ago, as a consumer, upload an image that had a little bit of text in it. Took a lunch picture, labeled it in Photoshop, uploaded it, and it got immediately rejected because of the text. So I don't know when Google has started doing this, but you can now, the search results are filled with examples of this happening. So We're pretty confident that it's in full force now. The problem being, like we talked about with the rejection of that PT image and the yoga image, is that it's, like all AI, it's an approximation of knowledge. It's not knowledge, and it makes mistakes. And we are now beholden to the mistakes that it makes, both on a tactical level, that we have to help the business, like David with ThriveHive, help the business get their yoga posts up. How do we do that? So that's a tactical issue, but also there's a bigger societal issue. Google becomes all of a sudden the arbiter of what's a good image, which is sort of, when you start pushing that idea out there, David and I start wearing the same tin hat.
I'm glad that I've finally dragged you along into my exclusive club, Mike.
Well, it's to your point, Mike, too. It's like when we're talking, they seem to primarily care about advertising. You know, when you, and I know you guys have talked about fake reviews and review spam, where it might not even be in Google's best interest to police fake reviews. You know, do they only care about images that are related to advertising, or would there kind of be this like greater good perspective when it comes to inappropriate imagery, like in the school situation?
Well, I think if they can scale it inexpensively enough, then their interests of good imagery and their need for profit align, and they will take the really coarse ones down through automation. But it's the fact that automation in this sense leaves so much beyond what they can know. It's like there's room for to drive a semi truck through. And so abuses like in reviews will continue to occur. They said the other day they took down whatever 4 million reviews last year. Yeah, well, they left up another 8 million. So, so if AI machine learning is 60% accurate or 50% accurate or 70% accurate, it still leaves a lot of room for this stuff to get through. And where their incentives aren't is to put people on that. They're going to do what they can do with their automated algorithms. Now in advertising, where they're held to a higher legal standard and they're making money, then their interests align there and they're more willing to do it.
Or they're losing money because frustrated advertisers bail on them, which is
right.
Certainly possible. Yeah,
exactly. So their interests, both legally and economically, align with increased scrutiny. Whereas in the maps world, which is quote unquote a free product from their point of view, they don't see the need to up their game beyond what's capable at low cost, high scale machine learning.
It's really interesting, and I'm going to be curious to hear if more of those sort of situations come up since that yoga, the image post being pulled that happened like a few weeks ago. Have you guys heard? Has Google corrected better for those posts? Like, has that been resolved, or is that an ongoing situation with what seems like a harmless like picture that shows some skin is ultimately still pulled down?
Yeah, you're assuming that they can control these outcomes. This is machine learning. They train it. They're not prepared to put people on top beyond it. So maybe they'll train it that this isn't an inappropriate image, but there'll be many more in its wake. Just as a note to anybody who's listening, and to David and to you, Garrett, I'd love examples of rejected post images. I just would like to sort of catalog some of those and see exactly, that inappropriate rejections. I'd love to see examples. So Mike at GatherUp.com if anybody wants to send me examples.
I'll see if I can set up a zap from our Slack channel right to your inbox, Mike.
So that would be very exciting. I could get really interested in that.
That make for a great post. Definitely we'll keep our eyes peeled. And I did share in the chat of the webinar the link to the tool that Mike explained, which is basically cloud.google.com/vision, is where you can test out the API and see how Google evaluates your image based on the various categories that it's going through. We do have a few questions, which I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on. And if anybody does have any questions in the audience at this point as well, feel free to submit them and we can get Mike and David to share their opinions. Megan wants to know, do you know if Google prioritizes customer added images or images that I assume the business owner adds into Google My Business listing?
Yes, yeah, so this is interesting. We actually have some, it's now slightly out of date data, and I should go into our system and pull the most recent data. But as of September of last year, or actually no, as of November of last year, we had been tracking pretty closely the number of impressions of customer added photos versus business owner added photos. And Google actually made a public announcement on their blog over the summer of last year, summer of 2019, that they were going to start giving more preference to business owner photos. And we actually did see that in aggregate across the 25,000 or so GMB profiles where we're a manager, that in July or August, there was a tipping point in the total number of impressions for business owner photos versus consumer ones. And I think, to be honest, I think that if business owners are adding really granular photos the way Barbara Oliver is,
on a
by
regular
and large,
basis over time.
on a regular basis, that Google will start showing those business owner photos in these, in these more sort of image-oriented carousels and packs. But your lack of photos is Google's going to fill that void either by not showing you as often or by showing customer photos instead. So I think that there's definitely, in terms of like, I always get asked like, oh, what do I do to rank better in Google? Like, I'm not sure that there's enough data yet to suggest that, adding granular photos for really high profile products or services is a ranking factor. But in terms of how I would spend my time, I think, making sure your categories are correct, kind of obvious, getting reviews, kind of obvious. I think photos are the next big thing I would focus on in terms of where I spent my time and energy in 2020.
Beyond your website and links to your website. Inviting Google.
Sure, specific to GMB tactics. Sorry, I should have had that qualifier. Yeah.
Speaking of, it just occurred to me too, and I had a question for you guys. Based on Mike's explanation of like the different types of pictures that Barbara was putting on her site, you got earrings, you got necklaces. Do you think images will be able to drive keyword like appearances? So if there's no other text reference to like a keyword search, do you think the image would get your website to appear because it has that specific, entity or attribute that's mentioned in the query?
Well, I think that an image in a vacuum is a pretty rare thing, right? I mean, usually an image on a web page is surrounded by text that is somewhat related to what the image contains. So, and I think that Google takes that in, or should be. And I think Google takes that into context when they are figuring out what the image is and whether that page should rank. So I don't know that it'd be an interesting experiment, with some of these made up terms that SEOs sometimes experiment with to see if they could do that. But how do you test a made up term in an image, I guess, would be my question.
Well, I'd be interested
I do know,
too.
just as a note, Garrett, to answer that question is I don't think Google is doing that yet because they don't have to do that yet, nor do they want to. But when I looked at thumbnail images, 0% of them, when I analyzed like 100 thumbnail images, had alt tags or file names that had any meaning. And all of the thumbnail images were showing based on the context of the content on the page relating to the search query. So Google is moving away from the need for traditional ways of identifying photographs to context. I think your idea is certainly possible, and I think it may be coming, but I don't think it's there yet, and I don't think there's a need for it because a good website's going to have good content and good images, and those are the ones that are going to win, and those are the ones that Google's going to show.
Totally. And it's interesting too, because when you're thinking about like picking your categories, and I saw someone the other day on a local search forum thread about how their reviews weren't showing up on their listing because one of their secondary categories was a school, which isn't eligible for reviews sometimes. And I wonder if that would almost be a strategy where you want to play within Google's rules, but you want to show up for, some sort of service you offer without outing yourself, if you will, by using images to do that, maybe.
It's possible. I don't know. I guess I'm not sure why you wouldn't want to out yourself with a category that matched. So,
well, just if you're losing
or good relevant content, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I guess in the schools thing is like you don't want to lose your reviews, for instance, but you don't want to label yourself as like a school. Yeah, that was just a example. We do have another interesting question.
Real schools, you could test it by putting the category school in the business name and take it out of categories and see if reviews all of a sudden show up if it's strictly a category. I mean, I don't even know how Google handles that, right? What is their understanding of a school bigger than just the categories or not? But that'd be a place to start. It'd be fairly trivial to test it.
So we're talking visual, and one big kind of thing we haven't talked about, and George brings this up, is Google doing the same thing with videos at all as does with images? What have you guys seen when it comes to actual like videos?
Well, certainly in YouTube, they're doing some very sophisticated stuff where if you do a written search, Google will take you to the point in the video in search where that phrasing occurs. So they are doing something similar in videos, although it's around language, I think, more than visual content. In other words, they're interpreting the audio and then translating that to search phrases. I don't know if they're doing anything with image analysis, although they do all the time in the way they use all the street view imagery, for example, to understand street addresses. So they do it there, but I don't know, in terms of search, whether there's any active value to the content of the videos relating to the search. David?
And we just see so few business GMB profiles with videos that I think it's hard to make that assessment. It's certainly in the single-digit percentage of profiles that even have a video attached, if not, low single digits. So we personally at ThriveHive don't have enough data to say one way or another in terms of how videos affect GMB.
It's interesting too with user behavior because, like for instance, with a review, you can upload an image, you can actually upload a video to your review, but that just isn't user behavior yet. Do you guys think that'll kind of catch on? Is there lag, or is that just not something anyone would ever take the time to do? Is be creating video content?
Well, Instagram stories and TikTok would seem to counter your argument that people aren't interested in creating video content. It is interesting. I don't think that's a natural sort of behavior yet, but as people get more and more familiar with sort of video selfies and that kind of thing, it's entirely possible.
And Google is encouraging it to some extent, right? They allow the 30-second video to be uploaded as images and in Google Posts. But video is hard from a business point of view because the standards are so high in terms of what's quality. It's a little harder for them to generate than a great, like for Barbara, generate a video rather than a great photograph. But I think there is, in some industries, it would make more sense than others, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely could see that, like in the hospitality, or if you run an attraction, there would be high value in having videos, or if any sort of like event venue, and I see that from time to time at like, if you look at like a bar or like an event, and you'll see some videos uploaded there. Well, this has been awesome, guys. I really do appreciate your time. For anyone who wants to reach out to Mike or David, and as Mike mentioned, he's looking for examples of images that are being rejected by Google. Mike, what's the best way to reach you, either on email or via Twitter?
Mike at GatherUp.com or M Blumenthal on Twitter.
And David, what's the best way to reach you if someone wanted to get in touch with you or ThriveHive?
Sure. I am dmihm, D-M-I-H-M, at thrivehive.com and at David Mihm on Twitter.
And if he's going to be putting his tin hat on shortly after this, so you can do a radio transmission as well.
Well,
it's on more frequently these days, Mike. You're right about that.
It's easy, David. It's easy. And like you said, I'm right there behind you.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Audience, as we can see, there is a move towards visual search, so definitely get your images up on there. Hopefully they won't get rejected up on Google. My name is Garrett. I am from Grade Us. This has been a co-sponsored webinar with GatherUp. If you're looking for any type of reputation management or customer feedback experience software, check out grade.us or gatherup.com. Great solutions. Thank you again, guys, and thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. Everyone have a good one.
So I thought